Hello, my name's Nick. This is EMS4303 Unit 5 video project where I will be doing a case study surrounding the death of a Wisconsin firefighter, comparing this particular case to a simulated scenario in our syllabus, as well as discussing the Phoenix Fire Department standard operating procedures for violent scenes, as well as a newer Tennessee law defining assault on first responders, and finally, what I expect personally of a leading officer on incidents similar to these. So let's start with the case study. In May of 2019, the city of Appleton, Wisconsin Fire Department responded to the report of a seizure patient on a city bus. And this is according to an ABC News article. After arriving, the firefighters discovered that it was actually an overdose and transitioned their treatment accordingly. The firefighters assisted with ventilations and ended up giving 2 doses of Narcan. The patient did eventually wake up on the bus and walked off under his own power. As soon as he walked outside, the ambulance was on site, had the stretcher waiting at the doorway, and via this body cam footage that was provided also on the ABC News website, the local Appleton Police Department was there as well. It shows the EMS agency urging the patient to kind of sit on the stretcher and relax, to which the patient did not want to. It was at the moment that the officers noticed, while the patient was standing up, that there was a bulge on the patient's right side, and they began to inquire what that was under his shirt. The patient claimed that it was his cell phone and appeared to become quite nervous. Also, on the body cam footage, you can see that the patient reach for the gun, and he begins to fire at police officers. In the CDC report that I used for this analysis, it states that firefighter Mitch Lundgaard was shot within 3 seconds of the gun being pulled. Additionally, Officer Paul Christensen of the Appleton Police Department was shot in a lower extremity. As the patient began to flee across the street, he grabbed a female and used her as a shield. And it was at that point that both the female and the assailant or patient, whichever way you'd want to describe him, were struck with bullets. Firefighter Mitch Lundgaard was ultimately struck in the back and did later die at the hospital, unfortunately. Officer Christensen and the female bystander ultimately survived. However, the suspect did die. So if we compare this Appleton, Wisconsin scene to the simulated scenario in our syllabus, you can find there's some similarities in both of them. It appeared that both fire departments, the one in the syllabus simulated and this Wisconsin scene, they were both responding to potentially a high crime area in the city. The firefighters arrived prior to the police department in the simulated scenario, so we can clearly see that the scene was not safe, as they were ultimately assaulted without any assistance. In the Appleton case, it's not clear if the fire department arrived before or after the police department, but they were essentially there. Either way, both scenes ultimately had police responses initiated with the original 911 call. Also, we can note that in both scenarios, the scene was not safe at some point in the call. In the Appleton scene, it was assumed safe as the call was dispatched as a seizure, but it later became unsafe and unbeknownst to the first responders. Clearly, we know that the fire department in the syllabus responded without the scene being safe and without police on the scene, and knowing without being ensured of a safe scene via the police department. One final similarity we can see is that in both scenarios, multiple first responders were injured. Fortunately, the 2 firefighters in the syllabus scenario survived the assault and made it home to their families. Let's move down or next over to and take a minute and talk about some standing operating procedures, and I use the Phoenix Fire Department SOP for this. The title of their SOP is called Operations at Violent Incidents, and it details the SOP for responding units, for the Phoenix Fire Department. In the initial overview of the document, it describes how responses to these unsafe scenes are a part of the regular duty. however, that it's up to the responding unit to decipher from what is or is not safe and act accordingly. It directs the first responder to consider the type of call they're responding to in conjunction with the dispatch information, and as a result, make a judgment call. It makes note to consider that dispatch information is rarely complete, and to rely on relayed police information for more accurate clues regarding the scene. Responders are directed to utilize the risk management guidelines and the weigh the risk versus benefits when making their judgment call on entering or staying on the scene. The SOP also includes instruction on what they describe as offensive operations at active police incidences. These offensive response protocols involve responders operating in what is declared as a warm zone. This can include multiple types of scenarios that ultimately require patient triage and extrication from the site. Responders are directed to never enter the hot zone, as this is only for the police officers. In contrast to the offensive response, you have what they define as a defensive strategy, which directs responders to safely stage away from the scene until it's declared safe by the police department. In step 4 of the SOP, the responders are directed to develop an incident action plan. This IAP is labeled as fluid, given that action plans can and will change as the incident scene does. In the final section labeled unforeseen or unpredicted violent situations, it directs responders what to do if the scene suddenly changes into violence. It directs the responder to flee from the scene, notify the police department through radio, make use of the emergency notification button on the radio, find cover, and only engage with the assailant as a last resort. And that pretty much sums up their SOP. It was fairly long, but that's the highlights. Moving along, I wanted to discuss one particular law from Tennessee pertaining to first responder violence. This law, it sounds like it brought more definition and clarity and additions to previous criminal law and included now first responders. So this is in August of 2020. Tennessee amended the legislation of the criminal law, and it was titled HB 8005, and this is through the Tennessee General Assembly website. The legislation ultimately updated the description of certain criminal offenses, such as assault, rioting, vandalism, and there were various other disruptions, if you may. And that was courtesy of the Center Square article in 2020. In reference to first responders, the bill details what is considered a simple assault as well as aggravated assault. So the simple assault is classified as a misdemeanor charge accompanied by up to 1 month in prison and up to $5,000 in fines. Escalating higher, you have the aggravated assault offense, which is an offense on a first responder where you will earn up to 3 months in prison and also up to $15,000 in fines. The bill also notes that spitting and throwing feces at the first responder is also considered assault. The bill also talks, under these new clearly defined charges, it appears that the first responders are undeniably protected from assault when facing these violent patients. So fortunately, this sounds like a good addition to the law that clears things up on potentially what may not have been clear. In our final discussion for the video, I'd like to discuss what my opinion is on the leading officer in charge on, say, similar incidents, violent scenes, and whatnot. I personally believe that it's imperative that the officer in charge on the scene maintains a calm, professional, and a competent demeanor. I think that when the officer remains calm, they're better able to assist in maintaining this type of calm and collected environment, and even the most dangerous or dramatic rather scenes, even dangerous, I assume. This demeanor can be contagious, as many of you may know, to the accompanying responders, as well as the patient and family. I feel that simply by controlling the attitude of the scene, responders will be able to effectively provide treatment and care to a patient that's probably more accepting at that point as well, given the responder's demeanor. An officer also who exhibits themselves in a professional manner will gain the confidence, of course, of his fellow responders, as well as the patient and family, similar to what we just discussed. I think the patient and result will be confident in the recommendations and the treatment that they are receiving. Last but not least, the lead officer should be confident and competent in his direction and treatment. This will help the guidance of his crew and the openness of the patient for the treatment and care. Overall, in violent and dramatic scenes, the calm, professional, and competent officer has complete ability to guide even the most hairy scenes in the best direction. That's all I have for today. Thanks for tuning in and have a great rest of your day.